How well has the Buhari administration done in its management of the coronavirus crisis in Nigeria? Well, for an answer to this and more, we are now being joined from our Rise Abuja studio by Femi Adesina, Special Advisor to President Muhammadu Buhari on Media and Publicity. Femi Adesina, good morning, and thank you for joining us on the morning show.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Well, we're going to be talking a lot about...
Thank you. Good morning.
Yes, good to see you. Well, we're going to be talking a lot about government's efforts to address the challenge of COVID-19. But first, I would like you to use this opportunity to clarify two things that were out there yesterday, even went viral on social media, so that our viewers can hear directly from you. The first, there was a report stating that a high-ranking government official died because of COVID-19, and the government was covering this up. Second, it was also reported that the chief of staff to the president, Malam Abba Kyari, who recently tested positive for COVID-19, had been replaced, and two names were put out there. I know that there has been a rebuttal from the government side, but please, could you speak further on these two issues? Because we really don't know what to believe, and Nigerians are very skeptical at this time.
Well, the times do not call for skepticism at all. Rather, the times call for believing factual information and not to follow false and fake news. The two that you have mentioned are obviously false, obviously fake, thrown out there by mischief makers. There is no truth to the two news items.
Okay, thank you for that very quick clarification, Mr. Adesina. Now, let's get right into the crux of the matter here and discuss all things around COVID-19 and its current effects that it's having in the country. I'd like to start with the lockdown situation that we're facing in Lagos, Ogun, and the Federal Capital Territory, and focus on one particular demographic of people, which is homeless people. Now, we have several homeless people on the streets that during this lockdown, and I have also personally observed, aren't on the streets right now. And I wanted to ask what plans the government had put in place for people that are homeless during these times. I'm asking this because citizens can look around and see and suggest different things. We have so many houses that have been confiscated by the EFCC, by AMCON, that maybe homeless people can be put into self-isolation in. Are there any plans in place for homeless people during this time, sir?
Well, not exactly that I can speak about. What I would like to first say is that every country has its own percentage of homeless people. Even in the most advanced countries of the world, you get there, you still see people who have built shacks somewhere by the roadside, and they are staying there. Nigeria also has its own percentage of homeless people. But whether there are plans for them now, I can't say definitely. There will be agencies, there will be ministries in charge of things like that. If they have plans that they have formulated, that will be very good. But it is not exactly something the presidency has acted on. If the presidency has acted on it, then I will have information. But I don't have information on it.
Well, still on the lockdown, many Nigerians have expressed concern about the directive that shops and markets and supermarkets can now remain open from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And the concern, of course, is that, look, when there is no transportation, how would the people have access to those shops and markets when it is not guaranteed that every Nigerian lives within a short distance to these shops and supermarkets? And then, of course, on the road, apart from the absence of transportation, you have security agencies checking people, enforcing the lockdown order. Is the government thinking of reviewing that directive? Because some people have even said, look, the whole idea of lockdown may not probably work in Africa, where we have different cultural peculiarities, and that we should be looking for African solutions to African problems.
Thank you. But it's not just about stalls and supermarkets alone. Even regular markets can open between, I think, 10 and 2 p.m. And these are neighborhood markets. It's not unlikely that not too far from a neighborhood, there will be some sort of market. There are also corner shops, shops in homes and all that you can always walk to and get your supplies. I guess that review of the lockdown process came because there were complaints. People said they could not buy enough stock. Some said, okay, the stock we bought, how do we preserve it since electricity is not guaranteed? So many complaints. So it's all in an attempt to make life a lot easier for Nigerians in these difficult times. That was why that review came.
And still on the subject of making life easier for Nigerians in this difficult time, sir, I'd like us to look into the situation a bit deeper. Now, in the United States, about 5.5 million people have filed unemployment claims in the country so far. And this is aside the government's $2 trillion relief fund that's giving citizens on average about $1,200 to cushion the effects of COVID-19. Now, the government have come out with relief packages. The private sector here are also stepping forward. But it's not going to be enough for the amount of citizens that we have that do need relief. What other options are there? What other creative measures can governments adopt right now to try and help relieve the strain that this lockdown is going to put on people and the pandemic as long as it is in the country? For example, maybe can some people have maybe portions of their pensions released to help them? What options is government currently trying to look into? Because as much as we can commend government, which I do, I don't necessarily think many citizens see the efforts so far as enough to really cushion the effects.
Yeah, thank you. If you recall the president's broadcast on Sunday, he outlined some measures, and then he said some other measures will be unfolded as the days go by. And since then, we have seen some other measures come in, particularly through the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management, and Social Development. So it's a developing thing, and it's a continuous thing. Any measure that is found to be good will be implemented. But then, these measures are all subject to finances. The United States, you mentioned, has budgeted $2.2 trillion. It's a function of the reserves they have. If a country does not have the reserves, where does it get the money from? And particularly in Nigeria's case, you see that oil has dropped. Yesterday it was at $24. Today it has climbed back to $29. And the budget benchmark was $57 per barrel. So income for Nigeria is almost wiped out, because at $24 per barrel that it was yesterday, you are almost not even covering the cost of production. If we are not careful, it will get to a point that Nigeria makes nothing in terms of revenue, in terms of income. So you can only spend the money that you have. That is why a country must always have a healthy reserve. US can bring out $2.2 trillion because it had a healthy reserve. Going forward, this is a lesson that Nigeria must learn.
Well, let's talk about the reported high-handedness of security personnel. Many Nigerians have reported, and they've protested, that the policemen and other security agencies that are trying to enforce the lockdown, that they've been high-handed. And yesterday, there were reports from Delta State of, a soldier shooting an innocent citizen, as it were, although we don't know the details. What efforts should be made to address the human rights crisis that can arise out of this lockdown, and the people trying to insist that, yes, we may want to stay at home, but at the same time, we're citizens, we're human beings?
Thank you. Just yesterday, there was a statement from the Inspector General of Police warning all policemen to respect the fundamental rights of citizens during this time. It is very important. The Nigerian army has also released some contact lines to say if you see any soldier violating the right of any citizen, please report through this line. So those are some efforts that are being made by the security agencies to ensure that their officials do not go overboard in maintaining law and order at this season. But then, that's on the side of security. Also on the side of the citizenry, this is not about wanting to punish anybody. This is not about wanting to make life difficult for anybody. Rather, it's about wanting to help people stay alive and stay healthy and stay safe. So, the onus is on them also. Onus on us all as citizens to ensure that we obey the lockdown order. Let's stay at home and stay safe and do all that is needful to be healthy at a season like this.
So stay at home is the message that we're trying to pass across. But I'd actually like to go back to what my colleague had expressed earlier about African solutions to African problems. And I'd like us to really look at whether the approach that was taken or the decision made by the president with regards to the lockdown was the right one. Number one, citizens were given just over 24 hours notice that a lockdown was going to occur. This is in a country that is run largely on an informal sector where people are making their money to eat by the day. Our correspondent, Femi Adesina, went to Alimosho yesterday to do a report, and we heard of a woman who has 4 kids. She's a widow, 700 naira in her account. What does 24 hours notice do for someone like that when it comes to a lockdown situation? We then decided that, okay, to alleviate these pains, what we're going to do is open markets from a certain time, open supermarkets and other essential stores from a certain time as well. How does this stop the spread of the pandemic? Should we not have instead done what the Ogun State government did, which is to inform citizens that a lockdown is going to occur? Yes, everybody is going to suffer. That's the pains of a pandemic. But we're going to give you enough notice so that we're not making you suffer. Because I don't see how people can be staying healthy and alive if they can't eat, if they're being made to stay cramped in rooms of 12 to 15 people at times with no notice. How does that suggest that the government is really actually looking at trying to make people stay healthy and safe, sir?
Well, at times, you know, with Nigeria, head or tail, you never win. When you're government, head or tail, you never win. Whatever you do will be criticized. They will pick holes in it and they will condemn it. What matters now is staying alive. Staying alive. The same scenario played out in Italy, it played out in Spain. They were warned, stay indoors, keep safe, maintain social distancing. They didn't, the citizens didn't respond positively, and see the body count in those countries now. This is not the time to poke holes in anything, rather is to make the best of whatever situation has come up. Now, when it was seen that 24 hours was not enough for people to get ready, there was an amendment to the lockdown order. Markets can open between 10 and 2 a.m. Stores and supermarkets can open between 10 and 4 p.m. There are still complaints. So, in Nigeria, head or tail, government never wins. But it doesn't stop government from doing what it should do, what it thinks is good for the people and what is good for the country.
Well, the president yesterday directed that salaries of workers should be paid. I guess this applies to workers on the federal government payroll. But there have been, protests also by university teachers. Some of them who have enrolled on IPs are even saying that as at this moment, their March salaries have not been paid. What is the guarantee that March salaries will be paid promptly as directed now, and whether or not we'll see a situation in the states where salaries will also be paid? Because many of the state governments are owing, salary arrears and all kinds of, other allowances. And in fact, in one state, the threat has been given that in the face of COVID-19, salaries may not be paid. What do we do about this? We want to help the people, but at the same time, we're not paying their salaries.
Yes, but you know, obviously, Dr. Bati, you know that the federal government is not responsible for payment of salaries in states. That is within the purview of the state governments. Talking of ASU, there was an impasse before this situation on ground over IPs or no IPs, and a good percentage of lecturers enrolled on IPs. But ASU still maintained a hard stance. It did not agree to call it. It went on a warning strike and then a full-blown strike. I think there may be nothing wrong in paying those who have enrolled on IPs. And it's something that the Ministry of Finance may have to consider, and something I will also want to engage with the Minister of Finance on, to see the probability of paying those who have enrolled on IPs so that you don't punish everyone together.
But what's your personal opinion about the states also meeting their obligations to workers at this critical time?
Yes, states have to meet their obligations, but I also want to agree that at a point, if this lasts too long, it's going to be very difficult because most of the states live from hand to mouth. It has always been said over the years, even before the advent of this administration, that most of the states are not viable. All they do is just to collect federal allocations and pay salaries and all that. If federal allocation begins to dwindle, as it would inevitably, if this lasts much longer, then there will be crisis in the states in terms of salaries. The finance minister has said if by June this situation persists, then the economy will be in serious trouble. And of course, one of the manifestations of that will be that salaries will begin to fail, particularly in the states.
Mr. Adesina, I'd now like us to discuss President Muhammadu Buhari. Often at times when you come on the show, we've talked about his style as a president, his body language, etc. And I'm sure, as you're very aware right now, one of the greatest concerns that citizens had leading up until his national address was the fact that the president was yet to address the nation on the COVID-19 outbreak. I'd like to get a better feel of why the presidency doesn't necessarily see the importance in the president having direct connection with the nation during a pandemic, and why the presidency doesn't see that is something that should come with the leadership, because you are leading the nation and their people. I mean, we sit down and watch presidential task force briefings, yet there's no president at these task force briefings. Why does this have to occur? Why is this occurring? And why is it being justified by this administration?
Thank you. This pandemic, well, started as an epidemic in China, became a pandemic, and China, after 10 to 12 weeks, has succeeded in beating the situation. But do you have it on record that the Chinese president spoke once?
China is a communist state, Mr. Adesina.
Wait. If you ask me a question, you let me answer it. It's not on record that the Chinese president spoke once to his country, yet they have beaten the pandemic. It's because action speaks louder than words. I have responded to this before. I know some rogue elements in the media tried to tilt it against me, saying that I said it's not the president's style to speak to Nigerians. That's not what I said. I said style differs from person to person. The style of the Chinese president was not to speak, but to act. The style of the American president is to speak as much as possible to his people. But is it not results that matter at the end of the day? The president has set processes and procedures and machinery in motion. And as long as they are working and they are talking to Nigerians and we're seeing results, that's all that matters. There's a saying that too many cooks spoil the broth. That saying remains true yesterday, today, and tomorrow. What do we have to gain from the babel of voices? The president, like I have said before, speaks when it becomes imperative. As that last Sunday became imperative to speak to the country, and he has spoken. If in future, in the unlikely event that this lasts longer, and he needs to speak again, he will speak. But he is not the person that will talk every day, as long as he has the right processes in place. And those processes are up and doing, and they are working.
Well, Femi, earlier on we were talking about the state governments and their capacity to be able to survive in the event of, the COVID-19 situation being prolonged for months. And yesterday, the Nigerian Governors Forum met, and they had a plea to the federal government that the federal government should suspend their debt commitments and should also provide stimulus for the states to be able to cope and perhaps pay salaries and meet their other obligations. Do you think that the federal government has the capacity to do this at this time, or is the federal government itself overwhelmed financially?
Thank you. You will recall that in 2015, when this administration came, minimum of 30 states could not pay salaries. About 30 states were owing salaries up to 6 months. What did the president do? He looked into the excess crude account. He looked into payment made by NLNG and other sources of income. And he did bailout for the states so that they could pay salaries. So as long as the federal government has what it takes, if it has reserves, if it has resources, this president will always assist the states, because it's the people that will suffer, and these people are Nigerians. But in the unlikely event that the federal government itself is hampered by paucity of funds, what then does anybody do? We simply just pray that we don't get to that point, but resources are very, very, very limited now.
Certainly, resources are extremely limited right now. In fact, one of the most shocking reports to see in this situation is that right now in the country, we have 350 ICU beds to a population of 200 million people. And I mean, if we go back to the health budgets, we can sit here and ask several questions on why we don't have a better health budget or a higher percentage being given to health, etc. But let's not dwell on that. What solutions, what homegrown solutions now are we looking at? Innocent Motors have come out to say that they can help to produce ventilators, but they've given a time frame that takes quite long, etc. What sorts of homegrown solutions is the federal government really keying in on right now and trying to support? Because I guess we don't have enough ventilators in the country. We don't have enough ICU beds, so we do need as much help, especially in the manufacturing sector, as possible.
Thank you. It's obvious that we have limitations, plenty limitations in different sectors of Nigerian life, and the health sector is one of that. This came upon us unprepared. Most countries of the world did not see it coming. So you have to make do with what you have. The president himself spoke about homegrown solutions in his national broadcast. And just yesterday, I think I read about Innoson saying it could manufacture ventilators. That's the beginning. If Innoson could do it and it will be certified as being fit and proper, why not? That's a homegrown solution on the way. And but one good thing that will come out of this eventually is that by the time the dust has settled, the health sector itself will not be the same again. You have government pumping in money now. You already have 10 billion given to Lagos State. You have 5 billion given to NCDC. You have the private sector coming up with donations. As at yesterday, it was heading to 16 billion naira and still counting. At the end of it all, the infrastructure that will have gone into the health sector, the expertise, the capacity development, and all that will remain in that sector. So Nigeria will benefit when the dust settles.
Well, Femi Adesina, let me draw your attention to something you said earlier. You referred to some elements in the media as rogue elements. For you to clarify some journalists as rogue elements, you must know a few rogues in the media to be able to label them appropriately. I hope, we have not been behaving like one of those rogue elements, and I would like to know who those rogue elements are and why you consider them rogues.
No, Dr. Fati, whenever you invite me to this program, I come. I come because I know you. We have been friends for over 3 decades. And like I say, you are my ancestor in this position that I'm currently occupying. So those I call rogue elements are those who twist every report from the negative. And I repeat, they are rogue elements. They are in the media, traditional media, not too many in the traditional media, a lot in the digital media. They just look at anything you say and they look for a negative perspective, and that's where they take it from. I recall that you also call them children of anger in your days in this position. So the children of anger will always take anything you say from the negative perspective because they want to generate hatred against you. They want to generate hatred against the government. What they don't know is that it's our country, and whatever we make of it is what we get.
Well, the good news is that here in the media, we have to stand on the side of truth, not on the side of anyone but the side of truth, which is why it's good for us to ask questions and seek clarification. Mr. Adesina, now reports came out that Abba Kyari, the chief of staff, was moved to Lagos for additional tests and treatments. And first of all, before I'm classified as one of those rogue elements, I would like you to clarify whether that is true and further discuss that. Because if he was then moved to Lagos, why was he moved to Lagos? Would the average citizen that caught COVID-19 in another state have the advantage of being moved to Lagos, or was this done on the basis of him being seen as a political elite or someone higher up in the country? I mean, what does it really say to us as citizens? How does that make us feel?
Well, the chief of staff himself issued a statement which has gone public. He said he was making private arrangements to go to Lagos for further medical attention. So it's a private thing. He said it clearly in his statement that he was going to Lagos and he had made private medical arrangements. There's not more to it than that. I think I had the Lagos State Commissioner for Health saying he didn't quite know his location or something. So it shows that it's a private arrangement that he made.
Well, Femi, a few days ago, Professor Wole Soyinka issued a statement reacting to what he considers constitutional encroachment. And he was asked to keep his views to himself and concentrate more on his area of specialization, which was described as fiction writing. But since then, we've seen a number of essays in international media warning against the possibility of world leaders using the opportunity of trying to combat COVID-19 to become dictators, to arrogate more powers to themselves. Let me quote from one article that I read in the New York Times. I quote, it says, in Hungary, the prime minister can now rule by decree. In Britain, ministers have what a critic called eye-watering power to detain people and close borders. Israel's prime minister has shut down courts and begun an intrusive surveillance of citizens. Chile has sent the military to public squares, once occupied by protesters. Bolivia has postponed elections. As the coronavirus pandemic brings the world to a juddering halt and anxious citizens demand action, leaders across the globe are invoking executive powers and seizing virtually dictatorial authority with scant resistance. This is precisely the point that Professor Soyinka made much earlier. But he was told by the presidency that he's a fiction writer. Do you think that there are no threats in real terms to democracy, even as world leaders try to combat the problem that we face?
Yeah, thank you. I read a further response that Professor Soyinka made online this morning, and he referred to that article. It's a potent and likely scenario in the world. But then the flip side of it is that the world is under an emergency. And if you need emergency powers to combat the situation, all well and good. The alternative is to count bodies in hundreds of thousands and in millions globally, which will not be in anybody's interest. So if emergency powers are going to be given for a brief spell, let it be, as long as the world can beat this pandemic. That is what matters. You need to be alive first before you can start talking of rights. A dead man cannot talk about rights. We need to stay alive first.
Certainly we need to stay alive. And I mean, once upon a time, a particular minister said that Nigerian doctors are free to leave if they want to leave. Yet here we are in a pandemic with only 75,000 doctors registered in the country. Are we trying to do, or is the federal government making any efforts to maybe try and see if we can bring any Nigerian health workers back to help us through this situation?
Thank you. Already, we've heard about retired health workers being invited back to service. Talking of bringing people from other parts of the world, every country in the world needs the capacity it has now in terms of medical experts. So it's going to be quite difficult to attract people back home at this time, because where they are fully engaged. But the federal government has talked about inviting retired medical workers back. The NCDC has already invited those who worked in that agency and have retired. It has invited them back.
Well, given the adverse impact that COVID-19 has had on our public health infrastructure, on the economy, is there any effort in the presidency or by the federal government to think ahead, post-COVID, to come up with strategies? Because that's what is happening in some other countries. They are already preparing for life after COVID-19, out of the realization that the impact may go far beyond the period of the duration of the pandemic itself. What is Nigeria doing in terms of strategies to make life easier after COVID-19? Because as it looks, all the economic parameters are upside down, and there's so much uncertainty within the economy, and of course, disruption socially.
Thank you. Yes, I'm sure you are aware that an economic sustainability committee has been set up under the leadership of the vice president. That answers your question. The Nigerian government is already thinking ahead, post-COVID, because the world is not going to be the same for a long time. The world economy will not be the same for a long time. As at last week, IMF said the world economy had lapsed into recession. You know that it's not an easy thing to get out of recession. So Nigeria is thinking ahead. That's why that Economic Sustainability Committee is set up, headed by no less a person than the vice president.
Yeah, but you know the problem in our country is that oftentimes when you don't want to address a problem, you just set up a committee for the optics. I'm talking in terms of, system-wide strategic thinking, not a meeting of politicians discussing oftentimes subjects that they do not quite understand.
No, I wouldn't agree with that a committee headed by the vice president will be subject to politicking. It's a serious-minded, hands-on person, and that committee will work towards what it has been set to achieve. This is not about politics at all.
Okay, and now I'd also like us to speak on access to testing in Nigeria. At the start of the morning show today, we were discussing this as we spoke about the fact that the governor of Lagos, his wife, and also the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria have tested negative for COVID-19. And what the greatest concern is how several elites are getting access to test kits when at the end of the day we already have a deficit or a shortage and not enough people are being tested. We're seeing reports of people who have been trying to get tested by the NCDC for many days. They haven't been able to. Then you'll hear reports of celebrities like Davido having access to 31 tests or so for him and his crew, whatever the case may be. And it's a bit unfortunate. It's not just in Nigeria. We're seeing it in countries all around the world, Mr. Adesina, but it's a bit unfortunate that, yes, it has sort of become like a game within the polity. I tested negative. This person tested positive. I tested negative. And everybody is so happy and willing to share their COVID-19 test results. And I'm just wondering why public health policy and guidelines isn't what's applied to these people. Stay at home and self-isolate. If you're showing mild symptoms, you can inform, but you are still advised to stay at home and self-isolate. Instead, the elite are getting access to things that there are people out there who may need that don't have access to. What's your take?
Well, the situation at hand is not elite versus the bourgeoisie, so to speak, or the elite versus the proletariat, so to speak. The COVID-19 is a virus that is so impudent. It knows nobody. It has no respect for anybody. Therefore, it's not about elite or the lower class. Everybody, elite, lower class, working class, middle class, must have access to testing. Yesterday, I think I saw the statistics that only about 2,000 have been tested so far in the country. You know that in a population of 198 million, that's like a drop in the ocean.
Well, Femi Adesina, on that note,
this was an emergency.
Femi Adesina, on that note, we will have to thank you very much for coming to the morning show.
Thank you, sir.
Today.
Okay.
Thank you very much. We'll see you again.